for attending today's first MPH research webinar. Our presenter today is Dr. Jim Guillory, who is a professor of public health at the School of Health Management. Dr. Guillory received his Master of Public Health degree from the Norman School of Public Health in 1997 as part of the requirements for completing an ABPM certified residency in preventive medicine and public health. He completed his internship in 1986 and he earned a degree in osteopathic medicine from the Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences in 1985. He received a master's degree in biochemistry in 1983 from the University of Kansas, and he was awarded a Bachelor of Science degree in environmental science from Lamar University in 1974. He completed fellowships in healthcare and public health policy leadership. These were the National Public Health Leadership Institute sponsored by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the United States Public Health Service, Health Resources and Services Administration, Primary Care Policy Fellowship. Primary research activities focus on the determinants of maternal and child health, particularly factors leading to disparities in infant morbidity and mortality, and the association between insurance status, prenatal care, and health. His work has resulted in numerous publications in peer-reviewed journals and many presentations. Dr. Guillory is board certified in family medicine and in preventive medicine and public health. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jim Guillory.
I know you had talked a little about possibly some different options and whatnot.
Yeah, unfortunately, I happen to be in a room next to a recorder, and there's nothing I can do about it. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know how to do anything with it.
We're here, well, we're kind of here in the office. I'm working from home and he's working in the office, but feel free to give us a call anytime at 913.
Jim, we're ready for you.
0, 0. I hope you guys are doing well, staying warm. We look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks for the bye.
I'm very sorry about that. Are we done? Are you ready, Sue, for me to start?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about a subject that I've been working on actually since about 1974. And that's right, 74. I got my first job of real meaning in a neonatal intensive care unit at the University of Kansas School of Medicine with a couple of real serious neonatologists from the University, from Columbia University and a couple of other places up in New York City. And so I learned a lot. Now, what I'm trying to bring us up to a page here. And Sue, why is that not happening? There we go. I guess it's just slow. So this is what preventive medicine doctors do. If you're sick, kind of tough, going down the hall, because we're really not interested in sick people. We're interested in keeping people from getting sick. And for the most part, my interests have been in conducting research over the years. So that we're all on the same page, let's talk a little bit about what these conditions are. An infant that's born at low birth weight weighs less than 2,500 grams. It's approximately 5 pounds, 8 ounces. A very low birth weight infant weighs less than 1,500 preterm, less than 37 weeks gestation, and less than 32 weeks gestation is very preterm. So why do we care about low birth weight? Well, it's real simple. If you look at survival here, with 100% here, and birth weight, what you see is up to 1,500 grams, you start to approximate 96% survival. And survival over 1,500 grams, when you get in that low birth weight range, is actually very good, although it's certainly not ideal. And the long-term morbidity that's associated with low birth weight infants is very important. So low birth weight or birth weight in general and gestational age are your two most important predictors of an infant's health and survival. If you look at CDC data over the years, there's typically 3 things that are going to make the head of the list every 3 years. I'm sorry, every year. And it's going to be birth weight, gestational age, and congenital anomalies. And those are the three leading causes of infant morbidity and mortality that you'll see over the years. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the traditional predictors of infant mortality. Low birth weight we've talked about, preterm birth, prenatal care. Prenatal care is critically important because this is where the obstetrician and gynecologist or the nurse midwife or the physician has an opportunity to perhaps help the woman to eliminate some bad habits, make sure her nutrition is optimum, make sure that she's doing the things that she can do to have a healthy baby. Now, in the past 7 or 8 years, prenatal care has been put on the back burner to a great extent, and part of that is because about half the women in this country don't expect that they're going to get pregnant, and they do. And so the new focus from CDC and HRSA has been preconception care. And then now we have some maternal factors that are listed. Certainly maternal health is a very significant factor, and we're going to talk about that a lot. Behavioral issues and, of course, demographics. And as you know, just about every study done, we have to include demographics because the demographics influence everything that happens. So low birth weight, and this is actually a very low birth weight, results in great cost to society, both direct and indirect, and a great cost to families. I don't know if any of you have been around a neonatal intensive care unit much, but they're really joyous and very sad places at the same time. And this is a picture of a newborn, and as you can see, she is on a ventilator, has a tube going into the urinary bladder, connected to a heart monitor. Kind of hard to go in as a parent a lot of times and relate to an infant like this, and that causes a lot of social problems. Couldn't help but show a picture of Chuck Norris with the young boy in the wheelchair. Mr. Norris is 3-time world champion black belt in his weight division, and he has done a lot for children. Infant mortality is 25 times greater for infants who are born low birth weight. So this is not an insignificant factor. And the average cost for a low birth weight infant, now realize not a very low birth weight, not one that goes into the neonatal intensive care unit. This is just a low birth weight infant who might need some special care, is about $50,000 a year. Now, this is one of my favorite sources of information is the National Vital Statistics reports. They give reports on deaths, and they give reports on births, and they give reports on morbidity and mortality. And these come out with preliminary data and with the updated or final data. And they're a great source of information for this type of research. What we would like to think is that we've made great progress with low birth weight. And because we've known about it for a long time and we've understood what it could cause for a long time. The reality of it is that we've made relatively little progress over the past few decades, but this is what's really alarming, is that the disparities have really not changed for about 80 or 90 years. And there's a very old book that I found in the library that's literally falling apart that shows graphs of what this ratio looked like as far back as the early 1900s, and there really has been little change in this ratio of low birth weight and survival of about 2-to-1 for African American whites. So as you can see in this graph, we've made a lot of progress around the turn of the century, but then things started really slowing down about the 1980s. And a lot of the things that happened in this time period were related to use of surfactant for the lungs. So those infants with respiratory problems that didn't do so well suddenly started doing better. And really some very modern technological changes that occurred during this time period. And the other thing that occurred around this time period was regionalization of neonatal care. And the realization that the more quickly you could get a newborn who is in real trouble to a high-level neonatal intensive care unit, the better chance of a good outcome that infant would have. But again, very little progress. And if you carry this out to our current time, there's really no change. So here's the 10 leading causes of death just summarized. This is from 2010. And as you can see, we talked about congenital malformations, disorders related to short gestation, low birth weight. SIDS is another big player. Here are the rates in Kansas and the United States compared. As you can see, in terms of percentages, Kansas doesn't do terribly poorly compared to the rest of the United States for whites, but look at this disparity. And so you see it again here in terms of the infant death rate. And so no matter how well we say we're doing or we think we're doing, when you start looking and comparing these numbers, there's still a lot of work to be done. Here are some of the things that we think about when we look at the factors related to low birth weight and infant mortality. Use of drugs, prenatal care, type of insurance or lack of insurance, and this is a really big player. And hopefully we're going to see some changes there, but it's going to continue to be a big player. The Congressional Budget Office estimated about 2 years ago that regardless of what happens with the Affordable Care Act, there are going to be 30 to 40 million, there are going to be several million people who will remain uninsured. I'm going to shift gears now and talk about our research. Our research objectives have been very simple. Determine those factors associated with low birth weight infants in Kansas. Our methods were to use secondary data, which has been supplied by provided by the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Mr. Crawford merged birth certificate data with Medicaid files. We used SAS to do our analysis, and of course we obtained IRB approval. Quick little story about Medicaid and how Medicaid makes cuts. When I was actually practicing in rural, well, I was not in rural anywhere yet, but I was practicing in Florida, and we had all of these Medicare submissions, not Medicaid, but Medicare submissions that we were turning in, and for months we were hearing nothing. We weren't getting payments. We had no idea what was going on. Well, when we didn't, but when the government found out what was going on, what they found was that bills and requests for money was just getting stuffed into the bottom drawers of desks and put in boxes, and the thought was, well, we'll get to these eventually, and eventually just never occurred. So there have been quite a few problems with the payment system under Medicare and Medicaid. Our statistical methodology was very straightforward. Univariate analysis involving chi-square tests for categorical variables, students' t-tests for continuous variables. Statistical analysis was typically a p-value of less than 0.05 unless we were doing multiple regression, and in that case the only variables that were put in the model had a p-value of less than 0.0001, and that was due to multiplicity or multiple analysis of the various variables. Here's what the sample looked like. Out of approximately 39,000 births, they were primarily single births. They were primarily white. Here's our African American. And they're roughly equal in terms of male and female. If you look at the low birth weight infants, for all low birth weights, your percentage was a little bit higher than for the singleton births, and that's because the twins and the triplets increase its number. So, and you can see where it really makes a difference here. So what we did for this study is we eliminated all of the twin and triplet births. So this is all singleton births, and it includes those values for infants that had plausible values for their weight and their gestation. This is just a slide that's comparing the maternal demographic characteristics for all births. and then for single births. And if you look at the single births, you can see that they were typically white. They were typically married, this being a rather conservative state. Very high percentage were high school graduates, and a very high percentage had had some college. The majority were 20 plus years old. Here's some of the maternal social and behavior characteristics, again for single births. In terms of weight, they were roughly equal percentages. About 13% were smokers, and this definitely shows up later because it is a very significant predictor of low birth weight. And a very small percentage were drinkers. However, the morbidity and mortality, particularly related to low birth weight, that's associated with alcohol use is very high. So here's some of our data looking at the bivariate statistics. In terms of infants with low birth weight, race was a significant factor. The rate of African American low birth weight infants was twice that of white non-Hispanic low birth weight infants. And of course very statistically significant. And these numbers are really what we see across the United States. And so Kansas in that regard is not really different from other states. For low birth weight infants, an unmarried woman was typically more likely to have a low birth weight infant at a rate almost 2 to 1. Education certainly mattered. Those women who had the least education had the highest rate of low birth weight infants. And maternal age was a factor. CDC reports that the number of teen women giving birth has decreased significantly, and this has no doubt had some relationship to the percentages of low birth weight that have actually decreased in a great many states over the past couple of years. But those women who were less than 20 years old had a higher rate of low birth weight than those women who were older. Now, we've talked about prenatal care and its importance. We look at prenatal care in 2 ways, particularly one way is to look at whether or not a woman starts prenatal care in her first trimester, or she starts it later, or she doesn't get any at all. And as you can see, there is a difference in the percentage of low birth weight infants, and that those women who start prenatal care in their first trimester do much better. We also look at adequacy versus inadequacy of prenatal care, and I have more data on that I'll show you in a little while, but what you see is women who get adequate prenatal care tend to have a, then it looks like this got reversed somehow. This should be the other way around. Women who have adequate prenatal care have a lower percentage of low birth weight infants compared to those who have inadequate prenatal care. In terms of Medicaid status, what we finally did is we took this and said, okay, this data set doesn't really reflect Medicaid or non-Medicaid status. What it really reflects is women with private insurance versus women with anything else. Because on the older birth certificate, we didn't have an exact classification, and even when we merged these with the data from Medicaid, we didn't have an exact specification for the type of insurance. So what this would really be would be mothers versus no Medicaid. This would be mothers with private insurance versus moms with Medicaid. This would be mothers with any other type of insurance or no insurance. And again, as you can see, the percentage of low birth weight infants is greater. Okay, let's look at the association between maternal demographics and low birth weight. I think this is a duplicate slide, so we can move right past it. In spite of all our work. Okay. Here are some other factors that we looked at. Maternal weight gain. This was considered during the time of the study to be a normal weight gain by the Institute of Medicine. They have since changed their criteria, and it's much more complicated than this. But this is the results that we found, and I know that these are right. We did check them quite a bit. And the women who had this amount of weight gain actually had a 5.6% low birth weight, and those that ate too little or too much had a lower percentage, which was, we thought, very interesting, but probably has a lot to do with the fact that women who are overweight and obese, and we know that that's approximately 60% of society in general, and probably can be related to women as well, but those women tend to have children who weigh a lot more, so this does skew the data. And then we looked at obesity, and you can see that those women who were obese, again, had a lower rate of low birth weight. The smoking data and the alcohol data are really, I think, dramatic in that the smoker has twice as many low birth weight infants. But a drinker, even with very small numbers of self-reported drinking, approximately 3 times the number of low birth weight infants were seen in women who used alcohol. I didn't know how these slides would turn out when you looked at them, so I went ahead and used them. When we get to the really important data looking at the logistic regression model, I've actually cut the big model down into 3 different slides. So now I know that that's simply going to have to be done with all of these, or I can make my fonts larger, but this is just one of the things that happens when you take a slide from one presentation and move into another. This is looking at insurance status, and here we have mothers who have private insurance, and then we have mothers without private insurance. And you can see the rates of low birth weight here. I'm sorry, we haven't gotten to the low birth weight yet. Let's just look at the maternal characteristics and the percent who have insurance. White women, approximately 75%, have private insurance compared to 25% of women who don't have insurance. African American women, approximately 44%, have private insurance. And then the mothers without private insurance are 55%. I think I figured out how to do this. I found the plug in the recorder. In terms of age, those who are less than 20 years old, as you can see, almost 43% have private insurance, but 57% of the mothers less than 20 years old have no private insurance. This is our age group here, where most of the mothers have private insurance, the 35 and more, and that's not really surprising. Married women, much more likely to have private insurance. And those women who have more college or more education, where they've had any college, again, much more likely to have private insurance than other women. Let's talk a little bit about insurance status in prenatal care. Kovalchuk developed a scale of adequacy of prenatal care, and this scale considers prenatal care to be inadequate, intermediate, adequate, and adequate plus, and it's based on when women start prenatal care and how many prenatal care visits they have during their pregnancy. The 2 groups that we looked at primarily and compared to the others were the intermediate and adequate, because these really gave you the same outcome when you put them together. They were not different. But as you can see, the women who had adequacy of prenatal care and intermediate prenatal care were much more likely to have private insurance. Of course, we talked about timing of initiation of prenatal care, with first trimester being the ideal, and those women who had private insurance were much more likely to start prenatal care during their first trimester than those women who had other types of insurance, and the numbers drop off really dramatically after the first trimester. Okay. So we're going to start talking about data analysis now. At the end, I'm going to give you all a quiz about this little drawing, and I'm sure that you'll be able to send it to me letter for letter. Let's look at prenatal care and low birth weight. Women who started prenatal care later, or got none, had a slightly higher percentage of low birth weight infants than the women who started in the first trimester. Women who had no insurance, or Champus or other types of insurance, Medicaid, women who had private insurance had a much lower percentage of low birth weight infants compared to those mothers who had Medicaid or no insurance or other types of insurance than private insurance. So again, private insurance compared to other types of insurance is a significant predictor of low birth weight. So here are some pictures of it graphically so that you can actually see where we have obesity. The more obese a woman is, the less low birth weight she had, and that goes along with what we saw earlier. Smokers, significantly more low birth weight infants, and those who used alcohol, significantly higher percentage of low birth weight infants. This is where we started seeing some things that really got our attention. We expected the demographic factors and we expected the social behavioral factors to result in low birth weight in Kansas just like they did everywhere else. But going into this study and not thinking a whole lot about maternal morbidity, these numbers surprised us and really changed the focus and emphasis of where we want to go for some future studies, particularly as it might relate to preconception care and insurance status. For example, a woman who had a condition related to pregnancy, which these are conditions related to pregnancy typically. The woman has uterine bleeding, she has a higher percentage of low birth weight. If we have fluid buildup in the placenta, abnormal fluid buildup, we have a much higher percentage of low birth weight. And if we have eclampsia, which is a condition of high blood pressure and proteinuria and some other things that go along with eclampsia, 10 times the number of low birth weight infants. And for preeclampsia, over 3 times as many low birth weight infants. So maternal factors related to the pregnancy itself suddenly jumped out at us as a major issue with low birth weight. Hemoglobinopathy, not necessarily associated with the pregnancy itself, but typically associated with being African American or from some certain Mediterranean cultures. And again, a huge difference in the number of low birth weight infants, much greater than STDs, much greater than cardiac disease. Chronic hypertension, we wondered how much chronic hypertension goes along with eclampsia, because certainly eclampsia includes high blood pressure. But again, with chronic hypertension, approximately 3 times the rate of low birth weight infants. And with lung disease, 8% compared to 5%. Oh, another slide for your quiz later on. Now, obviously, I don't expect you to be able to read this. I can't even read it. So, here's what we did. I broke it out. It's not much better, but it is somewhat better. So this is a logistic regression model where we took all of the factors that were potentially associated with low birth weight based on their p-value, and we put them into our logistic regression model. The value that's in parentheses is the normal value. And so when we look at the independent variable of race, what we see is that our adjusted odds ratio for having a low birth weight infant is approximately twice as high for a African American woman. For those women who were less than 20 years of age, or 35 or more, compared to those women who were 20 to 34, the adjusted odds ratio is not really much greater. For education, any college was considered the standard based on our percentages, and we found that those who had less than a high school diploma had a slightly higher adjusted odds ratio, and high school graduates, again, slightly higher. For those women who had more than one birth or no prior births, again, we have a slight increase in the adjusted odds ratio. And for those women who are unmarried, a slight increase in the adjusted odds ratio. Here's where the odds ratios, the adjusted odds ratios, really jump up and out at you. When we start looking at maternal medical conditions, uterine bleeding, 2.2 for our adjusted odds ratio. And then we have no medical condition compared to hydramnios or oligohydramnios. Adjusted odds ratio of 3.5. Preeclampsia, 3.4. Chronic hypertension, 2.5. So these women were significantly at much greater risk for having a low birth weight infant. And when you look at the other factors, they really don't jump out at you like these conditions associated with pregnancy. Now, chronic hypertension is not necessarily associated with pregnancy, but it is associated with preeclampsia and with eclampsia. Here's something else that got our attention, problems related to prior births. If a woman had a prior preterm or small for gestational age infant, the likelihood of her having a small or a low birth weight infant was much greater, now adjusted odds ratio of 3.6. This becomes very important because for some states, once a woman has had her child, she will lose her Medicaid insurance very quickly. And so one of the issues that we know is important is if a woman has an interconceptional period of less than 18 months, they tend to have more adverse birth outcomes. And so if a woman has had a previous problem, we know she's going to have a worse outcome. These are exactly the kind of women who want to have what's called a Medicaid waiver, so that they don't lose their Medicaid at any point and they can keep getting preconception and preconceptual care. And I am very pleased that the Infant Mortality Committee that I've been working on for 6 or 7 years actually got a Medicaid waiver passed here in Kansas about 2 years ago. And so for the first time, we actually had that. And interestingly, I think last year our low birth rate actually went down. Now, it'd be interesting to see if that doesn't cycle right back up or not, but it may have some meaning. Adequate plus prenatal care was actually the highest adjusted odds ratio. And the literature is fairly replete with the fact that women who get adequate plus prenatal care are sick women. They're getting more than adequate prenatal care for a reason. They have very well identified medical problems. This is another area of interest that I have because this is a relatively small number of women, but their likelihood of having an adverse birth outcome is extremely high. And if we go back to our original concern, this was insurance status. All we see is about a 33% increase in low birth weight in terms of the adjusted odds ratio from others who have private insurance compared to those who don't. That's not a huge number. And so it really made us think that insurance wasn't necessarily as important. But the problem with this number is this. It relates to the insurance status of the newborn. It does not relate to the insurance status of the mother, who's the one getting prenatal care, who had the problems related to birth, or who had the medical problems. We're not done. This is what I know about low birth weight and birth outcomes. It's not much. But it does take a community, and it does take insurance. And without all of these factors working well together, the mother is at much higher risk of having a low birth weight infant and having a less than desirable outcome for her family and for society. A lot of people have been involved with this research. Greg Crawford from Biostatistics at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the gentleman who, for the first time in history, convinced Lauren Phillips, I guess, to release data, because until we did this project, the state of Kansas was not releasing vital records data for these kind of projects. So this was a very new and innovative thing to happen. Rick Saminsky, associate of mine, who is at Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences here in Kansas City, where I spent approximately 15 years. Rick has really been a knowledgeable collaborator. Dr. Rye, who was one of my professors at the University of Kansas School of Medicine. Brenda Sharp, who is on this hammock somewhere. And of course, Sue McDaniel. Thank you very much, Sue. And thank you all for attending. I appreciate it. This was our first one, and hopefully each time we do them, they will get better. So, are there any questions or comments? I will say this, it's very different from giving a presentation in a room where there's live people. Sue, does any questions or comments? You want to wrap it up?
Hey, Jim, you have comments in the text box.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
You have comments in the text box.
Okay. The last one I saw was reducing the PON1 gene, which makes the fetus more susceptible to organoplasty. Yeah, and that, you know, one of the things that we look at in Kansas, particularly in the well water in the western part of the state, is what gets into the water. And so that's I don't want to drink it, I know that. And so I can't imagine a pregnant woman drinking it for 9 months. The PON1 gene function is impaired in obese individuals, including children. Okay? I don't know what to say about that. So if someone, whoever knows all about this PON1 gene, you're welcome to say what you would like, because it's not a topic that I don't get into the genetics of what's going on. Okay, here we have another one. Prenatal exposure to smoking was associated with obesity in the child later. Interesting that this study found that low birth weight, a higher risk of maternal smoking. It is pretty well accepted throughout maternal and child health research that smoking through multiple mechanisms increases the percentage of preterm deliveries and low birth weight, and as you know, they go hand in hand. If you did a correlation analysis, it's practically a straight line going from the lower left-hand corner to your upper right-hand corner. So they are very, very highly correlated, and I would expect that a smoker would be more likely to have a low birth weight of preterm infant. Here we have a comment, not surprising that the risk of low birth weight is higher in mother having conditions associated with metabolic syndrome. No, it isn't. It certainly isn't. That $49K annual cost, that is the first year. That is correct. And so depending on what happens after that, depending on the degree of morbidity, excuse me, and our disability, you know, this could end up costing a family a lot of money. And are there more long-term effects of low birth? Yes, absolutely. There are many long-term effects of low birth weight if they survive. Most of them are related to developmental delays, mental developmental delays. But there are others, and having a low birth weight infant, while it's certainly not as bad as having a very low birth weight infant, it can be a problem for many families. Although I will say that with modern technological NICU, you know, intensive care and other care, that many of these infants do quite well. Thank you for the comment that you really enjoyed the presentation. What was the most surprising finding from the study? The most surprising finding from the study, like I said, you know, was just these maternal factors. And, you know, I guess it's why I love this slide so much, because, you know, as a health services researcher, what really concerns me is the healthcare delivery system. I practiced in this system for a great many years. It's very discouraging. There are a lot of reasons that go well beyond the nature of this talk. But what was most surprising was that it wasn't the insurance status that was the real apparent culprit, but it was these maternal medical conditions. But then we started thinking about the fact that if you're going to get prenatal care, or if you're going to get preconception care, and you're going to get fine-tuned so that you can have a healthy baby, you need to see a healthcare provider. And starting all the way back in terms of pre-pregnancy and moving all the way forward, the healthcare delivery system is a prominent part of that, and the insurance delivery system is a prominent part of that. And so the most surprising thing was seeing these maternal medical conditions and realizing that, you know, this is probably where the real issues are, is the fact that it's the mothers that don't have the insurance, and they're not getting the care that they need. And that's why we have the morbidity and mortality that we have in newborns. And you're welcome. Let's see. Okay. Well, I'm glad that those of you who made the very positive comments enjoyed it, and I certainly enjoy it, although I don't appreciate stumbling around when I'm trying to figure out what I'm saying. It is a lot easier when you're in front of a group of people, I must admit, than when you're doing it on a computer screen. Yes, lower birth weight associated with obesity in childhood. Okay. Any other comments on that? Low birth weight, this is not surprising that low birth weight would be associated with obesity and childhood. It's replete with so many problems. Oh, great question. It's going to come from a dentist, and I'm so glad you did this to me or for me, because whenever you're ready, we'll look at this. The literature is full of information related to the association between oral health and infant birth outcomes. The question is did you look at an association between oral health and low birth weight? The answer is no, we did not look at that association. We don't have that data. You see, that's the problem. That's one of the weaknesses with the birth certificate data and the Medicaid data, is we don't have dental data in either of those data sets. And but I can tell you that there have been tons and tons of studies, and that periodontal disease in particular has been associated with preterm delivery. Okay, have you looked at the impact of infant outcomes for families, insurance that are receiving home visiting services, such as healthy families? No, I have not looked at that. But again, a review of the literature, and we did review the literature completely with the last healthcare reform, which was PLURA, in about 1996, the Personal Worker Responsibility Act. And about that time, Medicaid was really getting into home visits. They were convinced that this was the solution for preterm and low birth weight infants. And so there are quite a few articles that have been published that actually indicate that home visiting and even going so far as to go get the woman and get her to her prenatal care visit actually does lower the rate of low birth weight and preterm delivery. So home visits is a good thing. Doulas, nurse midwives, all very positive factors. Okay, another question. There are a few studies that show non-prenatal status associated with low birth weight, but studies are inconclusive. Okay, well that would be an opinion from someone who knows a lot more about it from the dental perspective than my perspective. Has a common trait been discussed? In other words, it seems they all have a common cause of causing insult or stress to the mother system, resulting in low birth weight. Oh, you're really making me think hard and long and years back about articles that actually look at the biochemical mechanisms of what's going on in the placenta. And I am recalling that the answer is yes, that many of these factors do have a relationship, and much of the problem is alteration of what's actually going on in the placenta. But there are probably lots of other factors too. And again, thank you. I appreciate the kind comments. We'd love to stay warm, but between now and the next presentation, which is at 2 o'clock, that I have to attend, I think I've got to get the snow blower out and get rid of about 6 inches of snow before the next 6 comes, because it won't do 12 inches of snow. Has there been a C-reactive protein level association? That I just don't know. As you know, C-reactive protein can be elevated in a number of conditions, including infectious diseases. So considering a lot of women, a lot of these conditions are infectious, I would imagine that there is. I don't know if there is a C-reactive protein associated with infant birth weight or infant gestational age. I think that's an excellent question, and that would be worth finding out. Particularly if you found that early and it was elevated, it might be a very good predictor of what was going to happen during the delivery. The standard American diet could be a common trait. It is indeed very sad. Well, yes, indeed, it is a sad thing. But living in Kansas City, I'm not going to give up my barbecue. again, thank you for the kind comments. I really appreciate them. Thank you.
I think you've answered all the questions that were in the chat, Jim. Awesome job. Thank you so much to everyone for attending this today. If you would like to have a link to the recording, just send an email to shmdesigners@atsu.com and we will, or .edu, and we will make sure that you get that.
Thanks again, everyone.